Welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast, where we dive a little deeper into the authentic lives of creative people who are taking action to design and live lives that they love. I'm your host, Angel, and my mission is to inspire you to take more action today to build the life that you want. Above all else, remember, to thine own self be true. And also remember, you miss all the shots that you don't take. Today's episode is a face-to-face interview with the often quiet and sometimes reserved man behind the camera. He owns and operates a local business called Field & Frame, which rents out camera and audio equipment. This is a man with a rich body of knowledge about getting the right shot and a good friend to many, including me. He agreed to do this interview on a very short notice when I mentioned that I was in danger of falling off my intended schedule for this podcast, and he tolerated my use of phone cameras for audio and video in a 2-story building of equipment. Ah, the ironies of a good life. In this interview, I ask about how he got to be the main operator at Field & Frame, which has been in the Nob Hill area since 1987, according to the internet. He shares some of his personal stories and perspectives and talks about changes in the film industry, especially in the transition from film to digital media. And he talks about how he would like to build more enthusiasm and more community around Field & Frame. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Alan Fulford. Alan, tell me a little about how you got started with Field & Frames.
Let's see. Well, it's just Field & Frame, but
Sorry.
no, that's okay. But if you want to go back, really old history was I used to do photography and art shows, like light shows for psychedelic bands back in the Midwest. We just didn't have anything to do in this small hometown of 15,000 people, so we'd find these interesting bands, that were kind of like, paisley, long-haired. Sometimes they were like high school athletes that were playing these bands,
Right.
And so we designed light shows to go with their music. And so that was kind of an interesting kind of career that I was almost like afraid of, because it was so creative that, it's hard to feel like that I had anything to do with the creativity of those kinds of shows. It was a friend of mine that was a couple years older that was, really into photography and had seen the West Coast scene of, psychedelia happening in California and kind of trying to bring it back to the Midwest. So
it was less your project than like a group of...
Yeah, there were 3 of us, actually. We called ourselves the Jane sisters.
Nice.
Like Jane, Geraldine, and Judy, and we were all kind of long-haired hipster types.
Right.
And that kept going on, and I got out of it right away because I thought, how can I make a living doing this? My friend is kind of like the son of a rich family, and he can afford to do this, but
right.
I thought I need to get a job. So I kept working around there in the Midwest in my hometown until later on. And in the 70s, I finally decided to move to New Mexico, and I had gotten a job at an airport, managing an airport. So I finally got to make enough money that I could start doing filmmaking on my own. And it was a little bit beyond kind of family sort of filming because I didn't have kids.
Right.
And
And you went to film school?
Well, I started studying film with a guy that taught out of Chicago in Purdue in West Lafayette. And that got me really interested, knowing that I could take all the pieces and kind of put them together and make it happen.
Right.
And then moved to New Mexico and started just working jobs like washing cars, and became a car salesman. And then while I was a car salesman, they said, if you want to go to college, go to college. You got to pay your own way, but you can get off work to go to school.
Yeah.
Since we had to work 6 days a week anyway at the car dealership. So I started studying filmmaking and even did a dance class. And then later on, I pretty much stayed with photography. And
was that here in New Mexico?
Yeah, at UNM. And the history of art, of course, and history of photography, but primarily the film history and filmmaking. So I can go back to things later on if you want me to tell you what was happening at the time, but
I'm interested in what inspired you to start this business, or how it came to be.
I think it was because like the boss that had this business, which was film processing for football teams,
Okay.
primarily, a little bit of student filmmaking, a little bit of scientific film in Los Alamos National Labs, that he pretty much just let me do it because all I had to do was make sure the chemistry was all good, be here on time, wait for the film to show up whatever day a week it was, like Friday nights for football games or Saturday nights. They'd fly back from Hawaii or whatever, the Lobos would, and we'd process their films. And I pretty much ran the place, and he sold the business to a guy that also didn't really want to deal with the chemistry and the developing. So I just took over, and I had no desire to try to necessarily make people want to do more film, because I knew it was like the professional way to do it was to do it in LA or Denver or Dallas, and that just a small town film processing lab would never go anywhere. And in the meantime, I was working on commercials so much as a production assistant or camera assistant or a grip or a video assist person that it was a great place to hang out. Yeah. And so when the business went down, because the Lobos quit shooting film, then I just said, well, I'm paying the rent, I'll take over. And that's what I did. I just took over the space, which was the east part of this building. And that was my place to live. And it was always plenty big, and I could just look forward to like trying to do things in the space, that I had fun doing, or by meeting new people or people that already had art projects in mind or video projects in mind that we could work together. But I was always at the mercy of like, well, there's a production coming into town and you're going to go to, Las Vegas, New Mexico and work for 4 or 5 days. Right. Or you're going to go to White Sands and work for 3 or 4 days, that kind of thing. So,
do you still do that sort of thing?
I still do. It's like really totally unpredictable. I worked on Tom Hanks behind the scenes for their interviews with some of the people, like the set designer and the costume designer, and one of the actresses was like 10 years old, a German young girl that she totally knew how to speak English, and her mother and her were there when we interviewed them. So it was one of those things where we thought we were going to work a couple days, and it turned out that we could not get the people they wanted to interview, so we had to keep waiting, going back every day, So we were there for about 4 days to get 3 interviews. And so, a lot of people realize that the motion picture industry is kind of like, you kind of hurry up and then you wait. Right. So you get everything ready. But if you get everything ready for, like, say, the lighting as it is right at the moment, then, an hour from now, it's going to be different. So you got to start changing it. So we would do that like 3 times a day. We would change the lighting, and we'd never still get a person to interview. And then, 5 o'clock, time to go home, Yeah. So that's some of the stuff that I still do. I mean, I still work on commercials too. But it gets to a certain point where there's a turnover and the people you're working with are all retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always new people that are willing to work for free or are really cheap. And then they start their own kind of group.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get used to each other and they totally like working with each other, you know. And if they all start earning more money, that's great. But for someone like me, it's hard to get back into those kind of groups.
Yeah.
I've been criticized as like, you know, as telling people kind of like maybe they could do it differently,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to hear that.
Right.
They want to kind of do it the simplest way possible, and they don't want to hear about any kind of like, oh, you know, mechanical way of doing things sometimes. They want to keep it all electronic as much as possible, you know.
Yeah, things are changing and getting easier, it seems like, in a lot of ways, maybe affecting quality, I guess. But
Right. I mean, a lot of people think that the sensitivity of equipment like cameras especially, or the intensity of LED lighting, that kind of thing, you know, makes it so they can shoot definitely on a DSLR.
mm-hmm.
And they can start building cages on equipment and, you know, putting all their other little stuff on there. And they don't want to do things like even use a powder puff to rub the numbers off the slate. We used to always work with like, oh, the makeup person had a powder puff. And the slate you'd be marking on with, you know, with dry erase markers. And you rub it off with the powder puff. And it was just a natural thing. Or if you needed an orange stick to clean off something in a camera that would build up dirt. You know, an orange stick came from a manicure kit, you know, things like that. So everybody kind of figured out simple things that would work for a long time. And then now you have to buy everything specifically, like little erasers that go on the markers that cost $2 a piece instead of using some old makeup pad.
Right.
You know? Puff.
So do you do more rentals or more jobs where you yourself are for hire, or is the business mainly renting equipment to other people?
Well, besides the business being primarily rentals, and I think that way, if the more it would be just rentals, it would be the best route for it. But I think I've always chosen to like try to do jobs for people that are nonprofit or independent. And so that means we end up making a lot of things like transfers from old tapes and old audio tapes, old video, reel to reel. If you get to a point where some things you finally just say, I can't do that anymore. It's broken down. The machines are broken down and I'm not going to go look for another one, you know.
Yeah.
But we're always still transferring, you know, people's films from like, they'll find a roll of film from maybe 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And then we send it to like Canada and they process it and then we transfer it for them. And we try to make some, you know, like sense out of it. Like, who are these people? You know, can you tell who they are? And usually the people that have possession of it figure it out. You know, they're like, yeah, this does mean something to me. This was my family in India, or, you know, this is my family in Missouri, and there was a flood and everything got washed out. And sometimes it's really interesting, you know.
I imagine it's neat to think about how like one roll of film back 40 years ago was such a different, precious collection of things, whereas we collect 100, you know, stills in a day easily that don't mean much, I think, on our phones, or, you know, it's changed.
Yeah. And then I remember like one of the first times, you know, when a bunch of teachers got together. My girlfriend was retiring as a teacher, but she still had another year to go, and she was having a party or something. And I remember them saying, here, you take a picture of us with a phone. And I thought, oh, this is so silly. I don't know about doing this. And they did not like the pictures I was taking at all. They could tell when I was shooting it that I was not getting what they wanted. It was just so funny. But it is. I think you mentioned something earlier that maybe I don't talk a lot, but I think that the reason I've had such great times working is because I listened, and I learned that, you know, when if people are interested in you, or if they think that you're helping them, they'll talk to you and they'll give you a chance to talk. But you don't want to give people your opinion when you're a production assistant or when you're a grip, and sometimes you have to wait until they ask you, you know. And I mean, still to this day, it's like, if you can just kind of shut up and become invisible, you know, that's a good way a photographer can work, I think, or a videographer. And I have trouble doing that still, because sometimes the new technology, I want to overcome its complexity. It's supposed to be simple, but sometimes it's so involved that, you know, I spend so much time just trying to get one good photograph in like 2 hours, you know.
Because of the equipment, the lighting, all of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I purposely tried to pick a camera that I thought would be difficult, and it's been really difficult. Whereas, you know, there were a lot of cameras back about 10 years ago that I thought were difficult, and I could care less about those cameras. There's been so many other great cameras and audio systems and lighting systems that, you know, that I'm pretty happy with, but sometimes people just, you know, they have to use something like a red camera, and it's just, they've heard about it and they have to use that, you know. So it's like, okay, I just still want to learn that whole part of it like that. The closer you can keep it to transitioning from film to the digital world, it's always seems to be the most logical and the most interesting, you know.
So do you have a favorite camera that you use these days, or are you always looking for? Right here we had a brief interruption as a couple young men wandered in with some questions about equipment. Alan politely asked them to come back Monday or Tuesday. We were recording on Sunday, and then he ended up helping them answer a couple questions anyway. And then we got back to the interview. I was just asking about your favorite camera, and then it sounded like your favorite camera is in your truck, perhaps.
No, it's the one that's been the new Panasonic camera. It's so funny that they'll come out with one that's only about a couple $1,000s more, and it'll be just, you know, kind of revolutionizing things if people try to use it, you know. And there's a lot of people that I, you know, come in contact with. They act like they're using things that most of the industry is not really using, you know. I mean, most of the industry is using Aeroflex cameras, and for the most part, and most of the documentary world or the people shooting nature and stuff, they might be using red cameras, whatever. But I think I like Canon cameras pretty much the best now. But I'm always willing to go back to Sony. They've got good cameras coming out all the time, and Panasonic's got good cameras, but Panasonic just, they seem to really want to stay in a really low-end market as far as the modern day user are not spending a lot of money on their cameras and getting really good results.
Yeah.
Whereas some people are buying Canon cameras and they'll be like $20,000 to start out, and then after a year and a half they fall to like $15,000, and you can barely make enough money to pay that 1 year. So I've kind of decided, even though I like Canon cameras, I'm not going to buy their new cameras, I don't think.
Right.
And just wait for a couple years. So yeah, some of the Canons are pretty nice. They're the ones that I use all the time. The 300s and the 300 Mark IIs and the 500s and some other ones. Not their DSLRs so much. Yeah.
Is that like I'm imagining it's a lot of things. Is it ease of use or the quality, end product quality, or what attract what?
I
Just
think
that you pay so much for them.
yeah, I think that you just got to figure that that if that's what people want, then you can hear it. Like if people keep coming to you and keep saying, I want this,
Mm-hmm.
you got to try to nip it in the bud right away and go, okay, I know they want it, so I got to get it. And then you can start satisfying people.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a big difference. Otherwise, they're going to find that camera somewhere, and they're going to be limited to its access. And so if we get it as far as a community goes, then a lot of people are going to have access to it, and that's going to at least let them pursue their careers or just
Mm-hmm.
their curiosity. It's like, what can I do with this camera? I think so many times people will just do something really crazy, like they'll spend thousands of dollars on a location, which might be smart, and do very little, have very little consideration for the equipment they're using to
Mm-hmm.
make the production.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that the location is going to do everything for them. It's amazing.
So is that a big part of your vision, is creating a resource for community to help forward?
Yeah, I think that if it could be actually like a co-op, that I've heard so many bad things about co-ops, especially maybe photographic co-ops. Even the food co-op here would be one that I would try to, to stay in line with. Like, okay, you got members, they get discounts,
Mm-hmm.
they have some say-so as like what their co-op's going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think people always want to have some input, and like, I wish I could get that, $6,000 black magic camera, but you got to get enough people interested in it to think that it's really going to work for a lot of people and get things done.
So are you networking? So the young men that just came in and asked you for specific types of equipment, do you know, like, are they finding out about you from classes or just out in the newspaper, or are you involved in any like school programs or things that might grow that kind of community? I guess I'm thinking.
I think that probably somewhere along the line, they felt like, well, I went to, Best Buy or something, or I'm always buying from some company in New York. But everybody gets into a bind where they can't kind of put the puzzle together sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and they need help, and they realize that, even if I just tell them I don't know anything about it, that's not like I'm not interested in it. I'd still be willing to help them. I think that's, a kind of honesty that they realize they're going to get into once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody can talk them through some stuff, with a video, but sooner or later, you kind of got to do it yourself and have somebody to bounce off of to really figure out if it's, if you're putting things together the right way. As far as being creative goes, I think that that's something that they want to have, no restrictions on, but sometimes mechanically or logistically putting things together, they have no real concept for how to do that,
Mm-hmm.
what might make things easier, I remember so many times, when I'd get hired for something, like I'm a kind of small person, and I've never been super, like into lifting weights or anything, but I've always been very athletic, and I've had to do things where I've got to protect somebody that's like 60 or 70 pounds heavier than me.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're in a situation where they could fall down and trip, or they could fall off of a train car like that's up in Chama crossing, going up through the mountains, like doing music videos, and you got to hold on to these people, and you got to let them know that, that you're not trying to restrict them, but you're going to be there in case they go the wrong direction. And the first time I had to kind of got hired as a dolly grip, which surprised me on a show. And I was just like, for 2 or 3 days, I was just getting the dolly ready and that kind of thing I never used it during that show. But then when they needed somebody to follow around the Steadicam operator, who was also my size, and very, very, very good at manipulating a Steadicam, I had to stay with that person and make sure that they could just walk backwards, and they could walk backwards for 25, 30 feet, and they had to be on a path. And that's kind of fun sometimes, and you feel like, that's just your job. And you might only do it for an hour and a half that day, and the rest of the day you're just kind of getting ready. Or you're putting things away or something like that.
So do you have a vision for the future of this place, you in it?
I think I would like more people to get involved, at least to where they realize that maybe they don't have to be here 40 hours a week. I don't think anybody is, except for myself, and I'm here usually 60 hours a week. But anybody else that would continue to help or want to come in and work would do it in a way that they would promote the industry and then be part of it out in the field. And that would either be working union jobs or non-union jobs. And to be out there, then you really realize what is happening right now. I had somebody say something about a year ago, that they're always throwing some new term out at us. There's this new kind of view teleprompter kind of thing that's called an iDirect. And it's a really old idea. People have been using it forever, but somebody came up with a new cheap one. And that allows the person that you're interviewing to constantly see you in the camera. So they have to look in the lens of the camera to do the interview, instead of the camera person or the director standing beside the camera and looking off to the side. It's hard to ask somebody to look in the lens and talk to somebody standing off the side. So it's just a mirror system that puts their image on a screen in front of the lens that the camera doesn't see, but the person sees that person. It's called iDirect. Well, I've had people ask me for things like a pizza box. And I remember calling up another company, just saying, what do you think these people mean by a pizza box? And they said, just a reflector, just a bounce board. And it's we call them bead boards, because it's just like styrofoam, but you make it too. You put a harder surface on one side that's more like white cardboard, foam core. And so when people start making up these names, it's just I get so okay, pizza box, right? I should have asked them if they wanted a Domino's or, Saggio's or whatever. But, and on sometimes if you try to tell them really what it was called 15, 20 years ago, then they don't have any idea what you're talking about. If you say beadboard, they might not know that, It's strange. But as far as things going forward, in the future, it's I guess I wish I would not have to just always go through these memories of what things really are, and then the way that it's interpreted now. And the only way to do that, I think, in some ways, is to try to get away from that same kind of thing of a guy that just came in a few minutes ago and asking about some camera, just to get away from that. But I can't turn it down. You know what I mean? So, but I wish I was in a position where I didn't have those people coming through the door asking me that sort of stuff.
I mean, just off the top of my head, it occurs to me, if you had that co-op kind of system where you could say, hey, you know, come on this day a week we have a beginner, you know, session, and somebody helping you host that, where then they could become members, they could come,
Yeah.
you know, learn a little more. I like your idea of building a co-op or you know, community, and it seems like you have so much resource here that it's kind of impossible for one human being to keep up with all of it and be available for everybody's questions. So if there was a way to
there's some things I would
that.
rather not pursue at all. And there's people that help me out that I think maybe they want to pursue something like an acting career, or maybe they want to pursue you know, owning hot rod cars or whatever. But at the same time, they're really good at mechanical things and optics. They're really good with people, you know, and it's kind of interesting that I think that, you know, that the people that are really like just so devoted to like, I gotta be a director, or I gotta be a makeup artist or whatever. It seems like not very realistic in this situations, because if you are going to have a co-op and you're going to do audio and you're going to do lighting and you're going to do grip stuff, then are you going to have like tents and stuff for people, you know, and smoke machines and all this stuff? When we have a lot of this stuff, then it takes a lot of different people with a lot of different interests, and so I would, you know, I would hate to think that it became real, kind of just real plain Jane, not very interesting. But it kind of has to, you know, to have a bunch of stuff that works, you kind of have to have that attitude, that
system kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe the people who know the equipment don't know anything creatively about how to use it, right. But they do know when it's a good idea to use it and when it's called for, and it's a good substitute, or it's not a substitute. It's the whole idea, you know, like just like if you're going to do something that's audio or video related, I keep thinking more and more about doing like old film kind of projects where you would least expect to hear sound. I mean, maybe that doesn't make sense, but like a lot of these old cameras never did sound, and you wouldn't expect to hear sound from them. And you know, we've had people bring us film for years and want us to transfer them, and then they go, yeah, put some music on there. And I'll think, what in the world kind of music do you think you want, you know? And they have no idea. And I think they think that I should know that, oh yeah, country western, you know, or oh no, jazz or whatever. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to start trying to influence people's, you know, impression of looking at some film with some music that makes no sense. You know what I mean? I you know, like I've been thinking more about like the kind of thing that, since you don't expect Super 8 or even any kind of film sometime to have sound, especially if it's like an art film or it's abstract, but then using the sound very sparingly, you know, because I've seen some movies that just like an old movie that Elton John's music was in. It was called Friends, I think. And it was a great movie. It was these young kids, but they really didn't have to say much to each other. You know, the whole movie just told you what was going on in their lives. And the music helped a little bit, but they did speak to each other once in a while. I mean, it's so... sound, I think, is the toughest thing. You know, I did sound once for a movie, and I hate to say that I was doing lighting with my friend John Stearns and grip work, which, you know, the grips always work with the lighting people primarily, or they work with the camera people, like moving the dolly. moving the camera around. And I didn't do a very good job of recording sound. But I always remember every time I would record something, I would ask the director if he wanted to listen to it. And he always said no. And it went on for days, for 2 weeks or something like that. And then I think someone got a hold of it and just said, you can't use this sound. There's too much background noise or whatever, Yeah. Or it's echoey or something like that. And I was so disappointed to hear that. And it was quite a few months later when I found out that they went back and re-recorded a lot of the dialogue and stuff. And it just I guess by the end of the shoot, I was beginning to realize that we were out with hot air balloons, and it was cold as could be in October or something around the balloon fiesta time, and shooting. It was so windy, and I thought, I am not prepared. I had no idea we were going to be in this situation.
Well, and maybe in that situation, there's no getting around. I mean, when it's super windy, sometimes you just have to re-record dialogue, I think.
Well, yeah, especially if you weren't, we got by so luckily on a lot of this stuff that I thought was just fine, right? I mean, we'd be at Cochiti Dam and it would just be quiet, and it would work really well or something. But, sound has always been the thing that turned us around to about 20 years ago. We really started realizing that people needed sound equipment. And that it was one of the first things that I realized that, gosh, this is maybe a $600 microphone is a big investment, but people need it all the time, and after about a year and a half, it might be paid off, whatever. And you say, oh, okay, I'll buy an $1,800 microphone. And then suddenly you realize that, oh gosh, maybe it's just too much. You can't rent that microphone out, or I couldn't, it just sits around.
So do you do more audio or more video? Is it an even split, or is this business more on one side or the other these days?
No, I think it's shifted back now to probably more camera for some reason. I think a bunch of people got, kind of figured out that, yeah, we need good audio, and a bunch of people a bunch of different individuals bought some recorders and microphones, and they're taking care of a lot of the audio. Whereas other people, it's just if you can figure out some way to record on a phone or on another little recorder, at least you got it that way, and you can get the microphone fairly close. I had somebody the other day that was recording, and it just turned out that a boom microphone was going to be the best thing for them, primarily because of cost. Right. So they could use a boom microphone and not have to hold it themselves and put it on a stand. And instead of using two wirelesses, which would have cost about twice as much, and probably would have, really, a lot of times it really tests you, where that it preoccupies you, and that's all you're thinking about. If you put up a boom, you just kind of forget about it, put on the headphones and say, it sounds great,
Right. And does that usually give you good enough sound, as long as it's not too windy or something like that? It gives you...
Right. I mean, if you're especially in an indoor interview situation, you got it made, except for if the refrigerator comes on or if the heater comes on, and then you got to quit,
Right. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, there's things that I was just thinking about, if the heater comes on or the refrigerator comes on, there's always these crazy little ways that people work in their department. And, I know people who would go out and buy way too much wardrobe, just to make sure that they had all these possibilities in case the director said, I don't like that shirt, I don't like that blouse, I don't like those slacks, I don't like that belt. And they have to buy all this stuff, and people are so busy taking all this stuff back, so there's 2 or 3 days of work just taking it back to the stores. And I remember once buying at least 50 cowboy hats. at Walmart, and they were going to just throw them up in the air at the end of the commercial or something, right? So they did, or whatever, or somebody else bought a bunch too, and then I had to take them back to Walmart about 4 or 5 days later. In the meantime, they'd restocked all the cowboy hats,
Right.
and they were like, they could not believe I was bringing these back, you know. And I just remember trying to tell these, you know, kind of convincing lies about like why we didn't need them anymore and why we didn't use them, you know. And if you blame it on somebody else, like, oh, this was for the, you know, the state fair, and they wanted all these people to have, and so my boss, who is a government person, you know, you try to blame it on somebody that they think, oh my gosh, you know, yeah, you were in a bad situation. That, you know, you get away with stuff like that. And then you'd learn how to avoid that kind of thing the next time, you know.
Yeah. So part of what you do is keep people from buying and returning by allowing them to just rent in the first place, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I think that seems like I was trying to suggest to this guy, you know, like, why buy another phone for one thing when he could just record, I mean, put a monitor on his camera, maybe for, you know, $30 a day, and then not make a big decision to just get another camera. But he wants to see himself shoot just like you would with your phone, but it's a DSLR. So it seems like
mirror.
Yeah.
I've used a mirror before for that very thing.
Right.
Well, thank you, Alan. I think it's been pretty interesting. I'm curious if there's anything you want to end with, or moving forward, if there's something that you want to put out there into the universe about where you want this to go.
Well, you know, I think that it would be fun in a way if you know, that forgetting about all this, that with old relationships in the business, or just as people I grew up with, when they knew I was doing something but I wasn't doing something like this, maybe I was managing an airport, or working in a factory, or working as a mechanic or something like that, I still feel like it would be interesting to see how we could all continue to learn from each other without like saying, well, you got to go back to school and I'm going to teach you all these things. I mean, I'm always trying to teach people things, but I figured that if I've just thrown it out there 4 or 5 times and I don't necessarily see any evidence that they've learned something, then at some point I think I finally give up, you know. Mm-hmm. And I become more interested in like the way that they want to do things. So, I mean, like, still there's like 100 friends of mine out there somewhere, and some of them, you know, just live down the street, mm-hmm. and we probably don't even recognize each other. But I'd love to see all those people and try to know more about what they're really doing, you know. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those friends are old friends from my high school or college or something like that, and I don't know if I'll ever get to see them, but, you know, it seems like it would be interesting in some ways to promote this kind of business that I think New Mexico is so proud of in a way. They're so, you know, because what do? Make green chilies? Well, we also have people who are learning about movies, and we have a lot of people that come to New Mexico to mm-hmm. learn about making movies because they realize that, you know, it's economical. It's not like going to NYU or mm-hmm. or Dallas or something like that. And so I think that it would be interesting to take what we really can do around the country, at least, and that would be one thing I'd like to do. And that way I can maybe find friends of mine instead of finding them on like Facebook or something like that. I'd rather just like somehow write them on it, in an envelope and say, I'm going to come and see you, or I'm going to meet you in Arkansas or something,
Making a documentary of my life and you're in it.
Yeah, or
Something.
or maybe it's really more about, maybe it's more about that time, and my life was involved with that, and your life was involved with that, or whatever.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Or I can't imagine what some people are doing, and I'd rather just be surprised and find out, sort of slowly.
So if a fairy godmother came in the room right now and gave you 3 wishes, at least one of them has to be personal, but at least one of them could be to do with the business, and maybe one for humanity at large. What would those wishes be?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think maybe as far as the humanity at large, I think that the more that we can understand, like those people that really disagree, that we disagree with, I think it'd be great to go on disagreeing with them, but understand them and have them understand us better. Especially with, things like, the environment or political things. But I think we're all really concerned about, like, how fast could the earth just, fade out, so to speak. And then as far as, I would love to see, like, where I could walk out my back door and walk to work, and it would be in a place that I live, and not just like, oh, well, I live in Rio Rancho, but I work at state offices in Santa Fe, or, or I live in the mountains and I come down and work at the museum. It's like, in that scenario, I think the more things that happen in the South Valley, which I really love, I would love to be able to work out of that neighborhood instead of having to come to this neighborhood, even though it's not that far away. I've worked here for so long and I'm sort of tired of it, So another wish, I think I'm always wishing that I wasn't reminded of all those people around us that are just like dropping off the map and dying. I'd rather try to somehow figure out, like, oh, there's a new life, and what's that new life going to do? And now that the new life is 3 years old or whatever, and what's this new life going to do? Not new business necessarily, or not new organization, but, physical animals, people, that kind of thing, plants, trees,
right?
And I think that's probably a lot more important than trying to keep track of, the neighbor across the street who just died or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important what we focus on, and focusing on the new hotness, on the new life, on the where things are going. It feels better than focusing on where they didn't get to.
Yeah.
Yes, that wraps up today's episode of Angel's Authentic Action Podcast. I hope you enjoyed hearing some of Alan's story and perspective. I know I have some ideas swimming in my head about building a co-op within the facility he already has there, and I certainly know where I'll be going when I'm ready to rent some real equipment for any big productions that come into my future. I hope that today you're taking at least one positive action toward your most authentic life. I appreciate your time and attention. You can find out more about Alan and Field and Frame at www.fieldandframe.com. That's spelled out, the word. And you can find out more about me at www.angellily.com. That's with 4 L's. You can also find me on all the social media platforms. Be sure to check out the Authentic Action School online if you're interested in ways to transform your life by your own design. And until next time, shine bright and be aligned.